Hi everyone, welcome to the Guardian feature release July 2024 launch webinar. I'm Stephen Earle, I'm Head of Product at Cloudhouse.
And I'm John Deadman, I'm Head of Pre-Sales at Cloudhouse, and I'll be doing the demonstrations today.
Let's get straight to it. So first of all, this presentation contains forward-looking statements and forward-looking information. You should not use it in any purchasing decisions specifically, as our business priorities may change. We may need to reschedule some of these, we may need to modify them, or we may need to cancel them altogether. Your participation in this session is based on the understanding that Cloudhouse Technologies Limited, nor any related organisation, can be held liable in any form should any of the discussed future plans not be realised for any reason. And with that, we'll dig into the July release. So I'm going to go through the release content, remind you around the cadence and why we've shifted from monthly to quarterly, and John's going to demo the release content that's coming, and we're going to do a small roadmap update at the end and get you prepared for the October release that is to come. So new releases, we have our monthly cadence for bug fixes and patches, and little tweaks here and there. However, we do not release features on a monthly cadence. We release features on a quarterly cadence. This is our first one of those since we announced the shift in February. So July 2024, October 2024, January 2025, and April 2025 are the year ahead set. In this release, we have change reconciliation with ServiceNow becoming generally available. We previewed this back in March at Pink, and we let you guys have a sneak peek in our May product update. Node detection with ServiceNow CMDB has been altered and updated to make it more friendly from an efficiency and administrative perspective. We're introducing Credential Vault Part 1 and end-of-life data powered by end-of-life.data. So change reconciliation with ServiceNow, you've kind of heard of us talk about this quite a bit, but really for me, augmenting your change management or change enablement process with the functionality and power of Guardian is a no-brainer. Why would a change manager not want their change requests to be automatically reconciled, to see that the things that should have changed in the environment when they should have changed, right there on the change ticket. With Guardian and ServiceNow, we are able to trawl ServiceNow for approved change requests, the nodes that are attached to them, reconcile a pre-change scan with a post-change scan, show you exactly what's changed, and attach that back to the change ticket. The way we attach it is we have an evaluation of the change, and then we link you back to the node record in Guardian itself, right from the ServiceNow ticket. John's going to show you how this works, and he's also going to go through how we surface change requests in Guardian, and also how you can evaluate the results of a change with Guardian policies themselves. So over to you, John.
Thanks, Stephen. So as Stephen mentioned, we're going to be going through the ServiceNow integration with Guardian, looking at how the processes inside ServiceNow can be performed more effectively and more efficiently using the capabilities of Guardian to add extra color into the change request process, but also to try and remove many of the manual interventions that are required as a change goes through its review, particularly where any issues are raised as incidents that need to be resolved. So the integration is designed to help mitigate a lot of these issues, to remove a lot of the manual activities as we go through, and to try and simplify the steps and allow people involved in the process to focus very much on the activities that require investigation rather than just doing traditional strenuous manual intervention to try and perform the analysis on the change. The idea of which is obviously just to speed up the whole process and make it easier for people to engage with and drive through. So let's start by having a look at ServiceNow. In ServiceNow, we have a change that has been created to drive through a particular change on a number of devices. And In effect, we're only going to be paying attention to these change requests while in Guardian once they reach a particular state. So in this case, this particular change has reached the scheduled state where there is a planned start date associated to this, and this is a particular device that we are monitoring inside Guardian, as you'll see in a moment. And what will happen at this point is Guardian will understand that planned start date, and before that planned start is actually hit, Guardian will perform a pre-scan that's going to gather the configuration of the device or devices against this particular change request before the change has been performed, to enable us to then do a validation against those devices once the change has been implemented. So we have a particular change that is ready for actions to be taken against it. It's been through its approval process and driven through up until this point. What that enables us to do as users of Guardian is to be able to get some perspective on what changes are planned and coming down the pipe that may impact the systems that we're monitoring inside Guardian. So if I switch over to Guardian, immediately you can start to see there are some new elements in the interface which are to highlight the fact that these particular nodes, devices, have change requests associated to them. So each node that has a change request against it has an orange flag that highlights where a change is planned against that particular device, or potentially multiple changes, as we'll see in a moment. But I can also see all of the changes that are present and planned against the nodes that are present in my node group. So what I can do is I can go and select my change requests to highlight all of the change requests that are present against the nodes that are present in this current group. This gives me a wide visibility over what's happening. It also gives me a clear perspective on what is upcoming, the timeframes which they're involved with, and if a change has actually been carried out, what the end dates and times were associated to that, so I know that a change has actually been performed on these particular nodes. This list also gives me the capability to link into the change requests inside ServiceNow to be able to get visibility into what's actually being performed, how those changes are working, and what they're going to be doing. So here I can go in and I can see the plans associated to it using the standard ServiceNow traditional classic interface in this case. But the idea of all of this is that not only can I see all of the changes that are present across all of the nodes that are in my node group, but I can also go in and see the changes that are present against a single node, a single device, to enable me to get a picture of what's coming up against those and start to be able to plan validation or be able to reschedule any work that might be going on around the outside. And the discrete element here is the ability to go in and actually highlight down on that particular node the fact that these changes are coming up against it, again with the scheduled times around when those changes are likely to occur or have occurred if that has actually been performed, giving me that detailed visibility and understanding on what's going on and how things are working. And this can also act as a way of getting back up to the change request to go and see the information associated to it, again by clicking on the link associated to it. So the real driver here is to go in, be able to see what's going on with these particular change requests, get a visibility of what's actually coming up down the pipeline and what activities are going to be occurring, so that I can get an understanding of how that may impact some of the devices that I'm monitoring. So we now have seen what is present inside Guardian in terms of aiding that visibility, but let's take a look back in ServiceNow at what happens when we have completed implementing a change. So if I switch over to another change ticket, once I have completed the work and flagged the work as implemented, then it's passed into a review stage, which is where this particular change request has reached, and that finalizes the actual end date associated to the change request. That's the trigger for Guardian to now do its post-change scan and to pick up whatever changes it can detect between the pre-change and post-change scans and make that available for people to access. But the other key bit that is actually happening is Guardian is going to add what it finds straight into the change ticket to provide visibility of what has occurred and what has actually been found as it went through its validation process. What this enables us to do is to aid that generation of information around the particular change, identify what has actually occurred, and then be able to report on that back into the change ticket to make sure all of the information is held in the system of record, in this case ServiceNow. In addition to that, we also want to try and make life easier for the people that are involved in performing the review of the change. So if this has landed in my queue to perform a review of this change, I can quickly see that we've gone through and done some initial validation that a change has occurred, and I can also quickly get to the information held inside that change request, change information, by clicking on the link into Guardian. And that then takes me directly to the node information, showing me the difference between the pre and post change scans. And if I filter down to just those changes, I can then very quickly see, as somebody who's coming in to review what occurred during this change, what was identified as changed between before and after the change had been implemented, to then be able to focus down and just make sure what was there was as it should be and meets all of the requirements, and then the expected planned change has been completed successfully. Note that we're not actually going in and enforcing exactly what happened during the change to validate down to the attribute level what has occurred on these devices. That is possible to do to try and ensure that what has changed is what was supposed to change by building policies around each of the change requests as needed to be able to flag that the change meets the expected outcome at the end of the process. But at the very least, what we can do is actually go in and validate that a change has occurred, be able to identify that in this case the permissions on this particular firewall have been changed, and enable us to get a picture that this was a change that should have occurred and now has been implemented. But we can also have the traditional policies that are associated to ensuring that the configuration meets its requirements by actually having a policy in place that can be validated to detect that that particular configuration has been applied to that particular configuration attribute. What this means is, again, we're removing some of the manual processes. We don't need to go back in and validate or wait for a scan to occur. We're validating this as soon as the change has been completed. The completion of the change inside ServiceNow is then going to trigger that scan that's going to then validate those policies associated to it automatically. So a quick way of being able to get to the information that's required. My job as a reviewer is made simpler because I'm able to get to what's changed very quickly and very easily and be able to then validate what's actually occurred very quickly. But the process that we're actually doing is validating that a change has occurred on the devices that were associated to the change request. So if we switch back to our change request audit, what we can see is two of the nodes that were associated have successfully validated, and we've identified that a change has occurred against them. However, there is a single node that has failed validation because it was listed against the change request, but no change was detected against that particular device. Now, this may be correct. This may have been a device that was added into the change request for completeness when the person performing the change actually went in to look at the machine, the change didn't need to be performed, it was already configured correctly, or potentially there has been no requirement to update that machine for a different reason, for whatever potentially might be going on there. But the key element here is this is being elevated and validated as this was a declared device that should have been changed according to this change request. We are going to flag that as a failure to validate because a change has not been performed against that device. From a more critical perspective, if for example my role was to roll out a load of patches across my devices and I missed one, then this would be a very quick way of highlighting that a device has not been updated as part of the change when it should have been, and therefore flagged that as an incident associated to it. And that incident is actually going to be raised automatically as part of the Guardian validation process. So in this case here we can see that that particular incident has been created associated to the particular device that failed its validation, and we've provided a level of detail associated to exactly what's going on, to why this incident has been created, providing links to the device itself to help remediate this particular impacted system and make sure that if, for example, there was a requirement to roll out a patch, that patch could then be applied. But all of this is being audited, all of this is being tracked, and the idea is to add automation into the process to remove the manual actions that are required and provide a level of speeding up that process, making life easier for the people that are involved in getting that change completed and signed off successfully. There may be some process changes required around understanding exactly what is going on. We've talked to clients and prospects that have actually been adding nodes and devices into change requests just in case they might need to be changed. But the issue there is if that's the case and that's what's actually happening, then potentially you're overly complicating the process of going through a change, and you're also then exceedingly increasing the amount of effort involved in doing the remediation and validation that a change has occurred against those devices when in fact it hasn't. So Guardian can then rapidly speed that process of validation up and make sure that all of the devices that should have been changed are flagged, or where not, then incidents can also be created associated to that. The other side of this that we're looking at with Guardian is if there is a change that has occurred outside of the change window, then that will also be flagged as an incident as well. So again, trying to make sure that we're picking up any areas where changes have not been performed successfully or as defined in the change request, and then we can generate these incidents, drive through those processes and ensure that any issues, be they as part of a change or an accidental change or an unexpected change, can be flagged, tracked and validated and audited as appropriate. So that was the demo of how we've implemented change reconciliation with ServiceNow. And again, just to hit the key points, the idea of this is to try and remove a lot of the manual effort involved in managing a change process, in being able to perform that validation of the devices that have been covered as part of the change, and trying to make sure that a level of consistent audit is available associated to what has performed during the change and whether that change was carried out as completely as it should have been. Trying to minimize any chances where additional processes would need to be put in place to perform validation, to go through and do that remediation action. We want to try and drive process where we can to speed up that level of detection of a problem and speed up that resolution of the problem a lot faster as well. With that complete, what I'll do now is hand back to Stephen, because we're now going to talk about how we can integrate better with the ServiceNow CMDB. Back to you, Stephen.
Great, thanks John. Let's talk about the node detection with ServiceNow CMDB. So basically you can get your ServiceNow CMDB content, bring it into Guardian as nodes, and historically that integration worked on asking for everything from ServiceNow CMDB every time we wanted to update our node estate. So what we've done now is we've tweaked this so it only asks for the nodes that have been created or changed since it last asked. This is much more incremental approach. It's much more efficient in data transfer capabilities, in the fact we're just pulling less data every time. Obviously, this will depend on your rate of change and rate of device creation and curation in your CMDB. However, moving to an incremental approach is just generally a much more efficient approach and much more in the spirit of playing well with others. As I mentioned, we're also introducing Credential Vault. This is step one on our journey. So what we've done is we've created an internal credential vault to store your credentials that are required for Guardian to do its job. What this does is prevent you having to have them saved and stored all over the place and remembering where they are saved and stored when you change them, and gives you a one place to administer them from. John's going to run through that now and show you how we create credentials, how you leverage the credentials in the system, and then he'll hand back to me for us to go through end-of-life data. Over to you, John.
Thanks, Stephen. So the idea is with the Credentials Vault to, as Stephen says, capture all of the credentials, making them easier to manage, holding them all in a single place to simplify that whole process of making sure the credentials are correct in place, and when it comes time to update them, that they can be updated very quickly and efficiently with minimal impact and minimal keystrokes to actually get that completed. The idea of the Credentials Vault as it is currently implemented is to provide that central repository of credentials that can then be used, and I'll take you through what that Credential Vault looks like, show setting up a new credential, and then show that credential being used against a new node that I create as well. So back in Guardian, we have a new credentials menu up on the menu bar. And if I use that, we can then get access into the Credential Vault, from where I can go and create a new credential. I'll keep this fairly simple in terms of what's there. Just create some basic information for an Ubuntu admin. We'll associate it to a particular connection manager group. Now what that's going to do is mean that I can then use that credential for any device that's associated to that connection manager group, and as we see when I add a new node, that will then help me automatically pick that up once I associate that node to that connection manager group. Again, I'll keep these fairly basic in terms of what information is going on. In this case, I won't bother with adding passwords. We can come back to that, do that at a later date, but I can save that credential into the vault, and that then means anytime there is a requirement to come in and update that information, update that particular credential, then I can do that very quickly and easily from a single point. But let's have a look at how that can be used. So if I go in and add a new Ubuntu node, then what we can do is start to do that setup. Again, because we're adding these into a connection manager group, if I go in and add it to the credential manager group that has that particular credential stored against it, then what I can do is when I come through and add the new device, set up the relevant information. When I select the credential type that I want to use, I can then go and pick that credential up from the connection manager group listings associated in the Credential Vault. So that immediately lets me pick up those credential information, attach that to the particular node, and then if that credential set gets updated at any point in the future, that means the new credentials will then apply automatically, because this particular node has been configured to use that particular set of credentials. In addition to adding credentials against a new node, I can also go in and add or change credentials against an existing node. So if I open up a particular node and go and edit it, then what I'll be able to do is go and modify the credentials that are associated to it using the credentials from our Credentials Vault. So in this case, again, because I'm looking at a particular connection manager group, I can then go in and see the credentials that are associated to that particular credentials manager group, and if I wanted to, I could then switch over to using my new credentials against the existing node, update the node, and save that particular credentials information against it for update further down the line. So the credential vault is really there, as I said, to speed up that process, simplify the management of the credentials, give you the flexibility to be able to update credentials across a number of devices with a single change to try and minimize that effort and time taken to maintain those credentials across many, many different devices. Now I'm going to hand you back to Stephen to talk a bit more about our end-of-life capabilities. Stephen, over to you.
And now the last of our payload for the July 2024 release, end-of-life data. What we've done is we've always been able to hold end-of-life data in Guardian. However, getting that data together in a fairly reliable fashion has always been the challenge. So we've introduced an integration and set up with end-of-life.date, which has a 350-ish item coverage right now. And we can auto-populate that data for you, and then of course you can leverage that data as part of Guardian workflow and automation using policies to evaluate it, provide you alerts, highlight nodes where you've got things going end of life or end of support, and then leverage that within your own processes. What we will be doing over upcoming releases will be augmenting this end-of-life.date data source with other data sources that we deem to be sufficiently curated and of value to increase the coverage we have around end of life and end of support date information. So John's going to show you how that works and how you can leverage it with Guardian policies, and then we'll come back and wrap up with our future roadmap update. John, over to you.
Thanks, Stephen. So just to take you through how end of support and end of life data is being made available to you through Guardian. Again, the idea is very much to try and keep it as easy and as effective as possible to be able to get a clear picture of exactly what's going on with any end of support or end of life dates that are approaching around your devices, sourced from the information from end-of-life.date. The whole element is really just to try and give you the flexibility to put in place preemptive measures to be able to understand when those end of support dates are coming up and be able to then take action associated to it. So how we're actually displaying that inside Guardian for you, if I switch over to Guardian and go into one of my nodes, the node information is going to hold that additional data around what's being sourced in terms of what the end of support and end of life dates are, and that's simply basically to enable us to go in, flag out what those particular values are. So in this case, on this particular distro, we can see that this has an end of support at the end of September this year, which means that I might need to start putting in some plans to implement remediation or rectification around those particular devices, understand what may be required in terms of either getting extension to support or putting actions in place to enable us to perform upgrades associated to it, or move information onto other supported systems if that was required. As Stephen mentioned, this is also obviously something that can be added into policies, so I could add this into an existing policy against the particular node group of devices to be able to flag that when the particular device has this particular distro version, that these end of support or end of life dates are present, and be able to get a clear understanding of when those dates are approaching to be able to take the appropriate actions associated to them. As Stephen mentioned, this is our initial release with a significant number of nodes that are being, or node devices that are being included in the content that's being sent out. The idea is this is a starting point, and as we start to investigate more options and more availability around end-of-life data that we think is appropriate and valuable to you, we'll add those into the process to make sure that you've got that clear visibility of other end of support or end of life dates as they approach, and be able to take the appropriate rectification around that. So what I'll do now is I'll hand back to Stephen to take you through what's coming up on our roadmap. Stephen, back to you.
Thanks very much, John, and thanks for going through that functionality for everybody for each of those items. And I'm going to wrap up now with a Guardian roadmap update so I can refresh you where we're heading and what we've delivered in July. So you'll remember when we established the Guardian roadmap in February, I went through each of these goals that we as Cloudhouse have for Guardian: ease of use, improving adoption, enabling you to get more value from Guardian, and of course supportability, both for you and for us as Cloudhouse. You'll remember this big data grid from February and May where I quickly went through the areas of functionality and focus and how they align to those 4 goals from a delivery perspective. I'm not going to go through each of these in detail now in this session, but what we'll do in our next user group is discuss the progress we're making against each of them. But where are we at? So July we committed to change reconciliation, enhanced ServiceNow CMDB, credential store phase 1 and end of life data. These are all in the release, as you've just seen, we've talked about and John has demoed. But I wanted to now kind of prepare you for what's coming in October. So in October, you'll see in the later column, we have a few items in bold. These are our candidates for October. So landscape search is cross-appliance searching. So in complex large estates where there may be multiple connection managers or even multiple Guardian appliances, you need to know where each one's managed in order to go and look at it and to manage that. The first step to breaking down those barriers is landscape search. So landscape search will enable you from one place to put in a node or an IP address or some other element about a node and be able to find it no matter where it's managed across the landscape. Change reconciliation with BMC Helix and BMC Helix CMDB integration. So basically what we're doing is we're replicating what we've just done for ServiceNow with change reconciliation and their CMDB integration and bringing that to the BMC Helix world. So BMC Helix used to be known as Remedy, is an extensive ITSM tool suite, and we want to make sure that we're bringing this change reconciliation value to that community. Panorama Dashboard. So Panorama Dashboard is our desire to bring the metrics and focus users of Guardian on the data that matters within Guardian. So where things are going wrong, where policy failures are occurring, where you have nodes that aren't being governed by policies or benchmarks, etc., and highlight that to you as an organization. We're establishing a set of Guardian evolution sessions. The first one will be on August the 7th, which you'll be able to sign up for, to see our progress on that, and we'll have a monthly Guardian evolution session as we go through to its initial delivery in October. So if you want to see a sneak peek of Panorama Dashboard and the progress we're making, sign up for those evolution sessions starting August the 7th. And then we're going to be extending the Credential Vault to work with CyberArk. So for those of you who use CyberArk for identity management, we're going to plug in Guardian to enable you to make use of the credentials you have stored there. And then the other items we'll discuss in the October release session, where we're teeing up what's coming in January. So if you haven't had a chance to ask a question in the on-stream chat as we've been discussing and going through the functionality, please feel free to send them in to myself, stephen.earl@cloudhouse.com. Post them in the chat session where you can, and we will make sure we catch up and respond to every single question that's asked. Other than that, thank you very much for spending some time with us regarding our July 2024 release. We will be having a user group coming up, and we will also have our Guardian Evolution sessions kicking off on August the 7th. So again, Panorama Dashboard will be the focus for those. Please sign up to the session if you want to attend and see that sneak peek. Thank you very much for spending time with us, and we look forward to spending time with you again soon.